Welcome to Project CB News. My name is Carlet, and I've got Natalie with me. And her story is a story of hope and a story of just pushing through. And there's quite a lot of things that went on during the time. But I don't want to just introduce her. I want Natalie to introduce herself to you. Natalie?
Hi, Colette, and thank you for having me on your show. So thank you very much. It's an honor to be able to speak to your listeners. So I think in terms of my story, you know, a lot of people tend to not want to hear stories which don't have the happy ending. And unfortunately, my family, you know, lived in a life where we were blissful. We thought everything was perfect. Everything was amazing. We'd just been blessed with our second baby boy, and, you know, life couldn't be better. And unbeknown to me, there was obviously something lurking in the wings, which we found out a couple of months later was a childhood cancer diagnosis. And as much as, you know, when people get a shocking diagnosis such as childhood cancer, you know, most people are, you know, they're shocked by the news, but they often push it away because they go, oh, that will never happen to them, until it actually does. And until you actually get the words coming out of a doctor's mouth that your baby has cancer. So my story, whilst is one of great and immense loss, it's also one of hope and ultimately of life and love, because we took the experience that we had in 2018 and we decided to make it mean something. And so effectively, that's what my story is about.
So let's go in that. So your child has been diagnosed with cancer, childhood cancer, and as a mom, that time, that moment, I believe, is one of those moments that you think everything is just gone. Nothing matters anymore.
So I think it is one of those defining moments in your life where you realize that you often get worked up and frustrated around really stupid, petty stuff, stuff that actually makes no difference and is of no consequence. So whether it's being in traffic, road rage, load shedding, you know, coming home, being tired, having to cook supper, you know, we take certain things that we do on a daily basis for granted. So to rewind a few steps, my son was 8 months old when he was diagnosed with AML leukemia, a very aggressive form of leukemia. And I mean, for a few weeks, and I have the platform and the privilege of being able to be on private medical aid and being able to see the best doctors. And I was under the care of a fairly well-regarded pediatrician, and I was seeing him almost twice a week. Something just wasn't right with my son. So, you know, he's a baby, he can't communicate. He was a happy and a healthy and a beautiful baby at that, but something just didn't sit right with me. And that mother's instinct is such an important like feeling to nurture, because I had a very strange suspicion that something nefarious was lurking in the background. So it was missed. The diagnosis was missed, and very shockingly so. And it wasn't that I am not well read. It's not like I haven't, you know, been exposed to medical dramas, especially around cancer. I even voiced my concern around cancer to my pediatrician, which then was dismissed. You know, it's, you know, a sleep regression. you know, he's picking up something from your older son who's at nursery school, you're building up a good immune system. And when I actually said to my pediatrician, do you think that maybe these strange symptoms, even though he was happy and healthy and meeting his milestones, do you not think that this could potentially be cancer? And that was, you know, sort of thrown out the window. And no, babies under the age of 1 don't usually get cancer. It's very, very rare. So out of desperation, and he was just on 8 months old, took him to my family GP, where we ran blood work, and then within a couple of hours, the ugly truth came to light. That gut instinct, that voice that was screaming in my head that this was cancer. I even had a very disturbing dream the one night, and I dreamt that my child had cancer, and I was back in the pediatrician's office on a Monday. So it was something that brings your whole world to a grinding halt. And you almost feel like you're in the twilight zone, because you now been confronted with this massive life-changing diagnosis. But you also thought you were going crazy. You know, you think to yourself, did your doctor potentially think that you were being, you know, like a dramatic sort of hypochondriac? And to eventually realize that potentially you were overlooked, your concerns were overlooked. The doctors that you'd entrusted your child to weren't thorough. I didn't see only one, I saw about 3, but it was my family GP who picked it up. As a mother who should be there to protect and nurture and care for her child and protect him from these kind of things, you question everything about yourself. Like, did you push hard enough? Did you do everything you could? And it still haunts me today, you know, just leading up to the diagnosis.
Oh, I believe that scenario and that event, it is life-changing, and you cannot, there's a lot of questions, I think, that you ask. Why didn't the pediatrics saw the diagnosis? Why the GP? There's so many questions that resolves around this case, and it's trauma at the end.
And you know, the other problem that you know, you live in a bubble and you live in a sense of false security. You always think you're in control. And as humans, we always want to predetermine outcome. So being the kind of person I am, it's not like I just sat back. It's not like I saw the doctor once or twice. I saw him multiple times. To, you know, for someone who's got the platform and the ability to go to a pediatrician multiple times, you know, financially, that's not available to everyone. And I can only imagine how hard it must be for the multitudes of people out there that are struggling with symptoms in their baby, don't have the ability to see a private doctor in a private hospital, don't have the ability to question them multiple times because they're one of a number. And for them to be getting a diagnosis as devastating as childhood cancer, you know, they must also equally feel as hopeless and as devastated as I did on the day that my son was diagnosed. I think I just raged at the fact that I had everything at my fingertips and I knew that this was not being investigated thoroughly, and the message never landed. So it does haunt you, but at the same time, you just think to yourself, you know, there are thousands of people out there in a similar situation. And my only recommendation is, if you have a gut instinct that something isn't right, and you know, you may be overlooked, but you know, blood work or just doing a simple blood test can actually show you a world unbeknown to you. You know, doctors are also going to have bad days. They're also going to miss things. They're also going to make mistakes. But don't ever not listen to that gut instinct, because 9 times out of 10, it's right.
It's sad that the health, the general health in South Africa failed you as a mother, and you reflect back on saying, but if the health system failed me, there are so many others out there that doesn't have the resources that you had, and yet again it failed you. So it puts a question on the health services of South Africa.
So I think that's where education and awareness plays a massive role. And, you know, through the great works that certain childhood cancer related organizations do, where they try and get the message out there, but you don't really pay attention until it happens to you or it's somebody that you know really well. So I think where we as a society need to get to is, you know, childhood cancer isn't necessarily rare, right? It is something that happens, you know, to children of any race, any demographic, any social standing. It's not something that, you know, will only happen to people that, you know, of a certain class, right? It can happen across the spectrum. But it's important to be able to get the message out, and also early detection saves lives. So I think where nurses and doctors, you know, play a certain role in terms of providing healthcare services, and they are often overrun, and you can make mistakes. I get that. But I think it's also important for caregivers, grandparents, parents, school teachers to actually start looking at signs and symptoms. If a child is squinting all of a sudden, or if a child is getting headaches, or waking up with vomiting in the morning, or bruising easily, you know, spiking fevers that are not explainable, you know, take them to a nurse or a doctor and express your concerns. And if you don't feel like you are getting heard, just keep on pushing to get someone to assess your child. And at the time that my son was struggling with these symptoms, I was very close to Linda Skitter. She's been a volunteer at CHOC for 40 years. And because of her line of work, where she deals with parents all day, every day, where they've got babies and children that are getting diagnosed with cancer, she says it's very common that the parents actually feel like they are going mad, like they're almost imagining these symptoms because it's falling on deaf ears. So she actually offered at the time to take my son, who was a baby, 8 months old, to Donald Gordon to get some of the pediatric oncologists to check him out. And I remember like dismissing her and saying, you know, like, really, Linda, I'm seeing a pediatrician and I've seen 2 other specialists. I think I'm on it. You know, how wrong I was there as well. So I think it's the education, the awareness, which needs to sort of permeate across the various communities. And I think during COVID, there were a lot of children that were never diagnosed because we were all isolating. Everybody was struggling financially. There was a huge amount of scare and concern around going to hospitals or getting checked out or getting screened because everything was dominated by COVID. So what we're seeing now is a lot of children coming back into the system that were in remission and were doing really well, and they've now relapsed because they never got the medical care and treatment that they should have had at the time. So post our journey, and we can get into some of the stories of hope around my journey, but you know, I think it's quite sad when you've been in the childhood cancer journey. We were only in it for 6 weeks, but when you hear about other stories and how other parents are still struggling and battling something like childhood cancer, the earlier the detection, the better, because prevention is better than cure. And in childhood cancer cases, the quicker you can get onto it, the better chances you have. It doesn't always work out in your favor, but you need to realize that adult cancers progress at a much slower rate than what childhood cancer does.
That is quite interesting. As you said that the childhood cancer is very progressive and it's just very quickly, and as the adult cancer takes its time actually. So it's those moments that defines you in the sense of, I didn't know, I should have known, and all those questions that you've asked as a mom needs to be answered. And it's quite interesting how you said that it still haunts you up to today that you didn't know certain aspects of a childhood cancer.
So another interesting thing I learned in my journey, and you can speak to people in the childhood cancer organizations, and they tend to forget that this is quite an important factor. When you look at the early warning signs, and CHOC sends out the early warning signs, I spoke at their event last week, Thursday, to launch their flip-flop day that's launching on the 23rd of Feb. And one of the things that I was raising is that when you look at the early warning signs, if you have a child that is communicative and can say, Mommy, I'm not feeling well. Mommy, I've got a headache. My legs are heavy. I've got a pain here. You've got the ability to start listening and going, okay, well, is this just a strain from school, or is this something more persistent?
Yes.
But in infants, in babies, which are not weight bearing, that are not crawling, that are not, because they're being carried, right? Things like leukemia, which my son was diagnosed with, they're not going to get the bruising, because you always look for bruising, and that would be an indication of potentially leukemia. But because he's being carried and he's not crawling yet and he's not walking yet, because he's not weight bearing, you're not going to see the bruising. What you are going to get potentially is a very fractious, unhappy, unsettled baby, a baby that's spiking fevers. 1 minute is a happy, healthy baby, next minute is fussy. Now, you as a mother know your baby's nature. And you also know when something is a bit off, right? You sense that. Yes. So it wasn't that I wasn't necessarily aware of symptoms, but they present completely differently in an infant versus in an older child or teen.
So let's quickly get into your story with all those symptoms and stories of hope. So let's quickly tell our listeners what you've experienced with your son.
Okay, so it was the 31st of July, 2018, when we received the devastating diagnosis that my son had been diagnosed with AML leukemia. And I mean, I've explained that we went from pillar to post. It was a late diagnosis. And by the time he was diagnosed, we had to dive straight into chemotherapy to save his life. And I remember still saying to the doctors at Donald Gordon, they were about to do a bone marrow aspiration. And they said, when we do the bone marrow aspiration, we're going to do intrathecal chemo. And I think this was less than 12 hours from the time we'd received the news. And we were walking around in shock. And I still remember saying to the doctor, like, no, hang on a second. Can we maybe go for a second opinion? Chemo, he's only 8 months old. What devastating life effects is this going to have? Like long term. And she looked at me and she said, if you don't do chemo today, he won't make the night.
Sure.
So the most shocking thing to me at the time was, outside of the late diagnosis, was your greatest enemy is time. You don't have time. You don't have time to find other doctors or get an opinion. You have to just put your head down and pray that you're doing enough to save him. So we started with chemotherapy literally from the get-go. And the day of his bone marrow aspiration, he was in a very bad way. And we had to transfer him from Donald Gordon to Garden City ICU because he was in desperate need of blood and platelets. He was starting to hemorrhage internally, and that's due to the leukemia. So his body wasn't making platelets, and he wasn't getting enough oxygen to his organs, and they were starting to shut down. And at the time, we realized that, this blood that we had ordered from the SANBS, probably 10 o'clock in the morning, was still not at the hospital, and we were going on at 6 o'clock at night. And I remember phoning a friend of mine who was the CEO of the blood bank at the time, because asking the nurses to keep on following up wasn't getting me anywhere. I said, where on earth is this blood? I mean, my son is probably a couple of hours from death's door, and we've got no blood. And the problem at the time was that blood stocks were so critically low, and there just was no stock. And it is a horror that no parent ever wants to go through, where you realize that you desperately need another day. You desperately need a few more hours, and you have no blood or platelets. Like, it's unfathomable. So started our journey with, blood tests, blood transfusions, bone marrow aspirations, chemo, doctors. It was just completely overwhelming. And we were in the process of chemotherapy and aggressive chemotherapy for about 3 weeks. And, the only way we sustained his life over that period was through generous blood and platelet donations that would give him a fighting chance to get through the next day and get through the next chemotherapy session. So whilst he was very critical within the first 3 days of his diagnosis, he bounced back beautifully, right? And we had such hope, because for the first 72 hours, we actually didn't know which way to turn. And we had such hope that, he would, be able to overcome this. At the time, his name was Kieran. We named him Kieran, but my older son, who was only 2 at the time, he couldn't pronounce his name properly. He kept on calling him Tiny Baby. So because we kept on seeing this happy, joyful little soul in his hospital bed, as much as he must have felt terrible with this terrible diagnosis and having pricks and prods and having a horrible time, feeling awful, he just was still a very happy, smiley little baby when he saw us. So we nicknamed him Tiny the Mighty. And that then became the name that we started using on all our social media posts to give family and friends an update as to how Kieran was doing. And it was 5 weeks and 4 days of relentless pushing, praying, trying to ensure that we were getting through every single day, but you've got to live moment to moment. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And, unfortunately, on the 9th of September in 2018, after 3 weeks of responding really well to the chemo, his bone marrow just never regenerated. And unfortunately, he passed away from all the secondary infections that you can pick up in hospital. And I think his little body was just really, really tired. So as much as that was probably one of the most horrific moments of any human being's life, having to part with their son, there was a huge amount of love, encouragement, selfless donations of blood donations being done by the public, people just reaching out and embracing our family, and all doing that because they all wanted to be part and parcel of Tiny the Mighty's journey to overcome childhood cancer. So through those 6 weeks or 5 weeks that we were in this process, people were, sending me photographs of them donating blood, and they had terrible fear of needles. People were starting to do tiny acts of love and kindness because Tiny can be mighty, as my son proved in hospital. And although he was so small, he had the impact of inspiring other people to pay it forward and to either assist organizations like CHOC, or there's a few others like Rainbows and Smiles and Cupcakes of Hope, or sign up to be a bone marrow donor. We were so encouraged by what we started seeing just as a movement in those 6 weeks, that as much as we were bombarded daily by the horrific effects of childhood cancer, we were also warmed and encouraged and held by a community as far and wide as the US and India.
Sure.
So it just shows you that doesn't matter how small you are, you can do great things. And it actually starts with every single person out there. It's not someone else's business to do it. It's up to you. So it was a really tough and hard time for our family. But, when I look back on that time, we decided to respond to this crisis and make his life mean something, make his little life, even however long or short it may be, have an impact. And we've continued with blood drives, raising awareness for childhood cancer, trying to support organizations like CHOC, just so that we can ensure that other people in a similar situation don't feel alone, don't feel like, even though you may have lost, you haven't actually won the battle. Because, whilst he may not be here with me physically, we talk about him daily. We honor him in many beautiful ways. There is just so much you can do to make someone's life be an impact and meaningful one.
Sure, Natalie, it's definitely a story of hope. And when Tiny the Mighty is no longer here, his legacy still continues, and you are touching so many hearts and souls with the story. And at the end of the day, it's education and knowledge that breaks the barriers for a better future, or a better next day for whoever just might have this or childhood cancer or cancer in itself.
So I think some of the things that people don't realize is, blood donations and platelet donations, and we can talk about bone marrow ones, but we never got to that point, sadly. But we have encouraged people to register as a bone marrow donor. But in terms of blood donations in this country, most blood is used in trauma situations, so accident victims coming into hospital, cancer patients, which are depleted and their bone marrow just cannot produce healthy blood cells due to the effects of chemo. And I'm sure everyone in South Africa or around the globe has someone that either directly they know directly, or someone very close to them that's been diagnosed with cancer. Okay. So just based on the fact that you may know someone who has cancer, at some point in time in their journey to overcome that disease, they may need blood or platelets. And it may not just be one bag, it might be continuous while they continue with treatment to give them a chance at a second chance at life. People with autoimmune diseases will often need blood and platelets because their body is also very depleted. And a lot of the medical treatments are also very toxic, similar to chemo. I'm sure everyone knows of someone who's about to have a baby, and pregnant mothers and infants in ICU often need blood and platelets. So if you just apply it to the scenarios of people around you, don't do it for a story like Tiny the Mighty. Do it for people that you know that at some point they may be in that situation, and think about that empathetically. And then, you know, a lot of people would say, oh, but I'm scared of needles. Well, can you imagine how scared an 8-month-old baby must be when he's being prodded and probed just to try and save his life? So I think we can all tap into that inner, you know, wanting to do good, trying to pay it forward, be selfless. So if you don't know of someone who's currently going through some traumatic journey, think of the people in your own circle, and then try and overcome that fear of needles and, you know, potentially donating blood, and just go to a donor center and go and try and do it, right? And it will actually make you feel like you've actually done something really amazing, because there's someone out there who might get to their 21st birthday just because you gave a bag of blood or platelets.
Natalie, it sounds definitely like we need to be brave in the sense of
Yes.
helping others and be kind. It's a sort of kindness that you as a citizen just needs to extend to the next person, or I mean, just so that they can survive. We don't always look at it in the sense of survival matters, you know. I mean, last year was my first time that I've donated blood, and can I tell you, I'm so afraid of needles. It's bad, but there's that sense, as you've stated, that I'm doing something. I can't do much, but at least someone out there may survive another day, may just see their, like you said, their 21st birthday. And it's very encouraging that at the end of the day, we should not think of ourselves being afraid of being afraid of needles. It's just that we should just push through that barrier and say, let us be kind. Let us just do something.
I find it very funny that I'll have people, when we've had quite a few blood drives in Dainfern at the Golf Estate, and we've encouraged quite a few in Johannesburg. And then there have been other patients that have been diagnosed, childhood cancer patients, where you know, the parents have basically taken on themselves to create community-led blood drives. And generally people will come out and donate more when there is a personal story attached to the blood drive. You know, just a random blood drive in a mall sort of is a little bit sterile and people don't really feel compelled. But, you know, those community-led stories really drive people because they want to show their support and love for a particular family going through this. But I always find it funny when we had our blood drives and you'd see somebody at, you know, the clubhouse in Dainfern, and they go, oh, I'm so scared of needles, and he has an arm filled with tattoos. And I'm like looking at him like, really, really, really.
Yeah, that
You know,
contradictive
but
part.
yeah, so you know, I think people will only start giving of themselves when they feel a compulsion to do so, because it hits home on a personal and very deep level. So I do think there is a a gap in terms of how education around not only the childhood cancers and the early warning signs, but also what we can do as ordinary citizens that don't cost us anything, but just take a little bit of our time. So if we're putting our efforts and energies into helping with fundraisers or trying to spread awareness or helping organizations like CHOC with their various CHOC houses and assisting families that are going through cancer treatment, and then potentially even doing a cheek swab and sending that into DKMS, which is, I can't pronounce, it's a German name, but it's basically the Sunflower Fund that became the DKMS, and they are the bone marrow registry. There's also the South African bone marrow registry, and that's a cheek swab, and you could have your tissue typed and you could be on the registry to be someone's bone marrow match. And, going to do a blood donation, these are all things that you can do that make a massive difference to someone's life. And everybody wants to feel like a hero. Everybody at some point in their life, I think when you lie on your deathbed, I think you would want to go that you've made someone's life and suffering easier because of the fact that you selflessly did something.
Yeah. So, do something selflessly today. And that is where the 23rd of Feb also comes into play, where we've got the CHOC Childhood Cancer Foundation, so that you just go and buy a CHOC sticker for 10 Rand, and then you just give back a little bit to anyone with cancer. So and then you can get your then you can put on your flip-flops as well and just have an absolute incredible day.
So look, I mean, 10 Rand doesn't sound like a lot, right? But once again, like in my son's story, tiny can be mighty, right?
Yes.
All those 10 Rands add up. Okay. So I think you can purchase your flip-flop day stickers at P&A or Techie Town. You can also make a donation if you wanted to, if that's too much admin, on CHOC's website. I think they've got Zapper and SnapScan, and you could make an EFT if you wanted to. But I mean, a story that, they had a little boy talk at one of the high teas last year, and he was having treatment at Charlotte Makeke Hospital. And he was the sole provider. He was an older brother of two other siblings whose parents had died through COVID. He was living on grants, and he was having chemotherapy treatment at Charlotte Makeke. And it was through CHOC, right? Taking him to and from, because he couldn't afford transport on a taxi to get treatment. And when you think to yourself, this is a 16-year-old boy, he's trying to get through school. He's got two younger siblings looking at him to be a provider, and he is feeling horrendous after treatment. He can't even buy himself a Coke or something to eat because he has to use that money to get home to his siblings. When you hear of those kind of stories, 10 Rand makes a world of difference in his life. And there are so many of those stories. So I think it's not so much about just wearing your flip-flops and paying 10 Rand. It's that if you can do more, there are such hardships out there that if you go buy a cappuccino and it's 30 Rand, that could have been 3 10 Rand donations into the likes of CHOC to assist them in helping so many others.
So let us do something. Let us be kind and donate, get your sticker, or do whatever you can to help the CHOC Foundation so to make a difference in any child's life. You've heard the stories, you've heard Natalie's story, and at the end of the day, you can make a difference. So be kind. I think that is the general theme of today, just to be kind and be a hero. Go for those blood and just do something. I know that you can do that. So thank you so much, Natalie, for your time. I see our time is nearly up as well. So thank you so much for just extending a 40 minutes with us. And thank you for the story that you've told, the story of hope.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And thank you to your listeners.